In this video, we will go through the process of taking our UVs and importing them into a graphic software such as Photoshop. So right now you can see I have this M1 assault rifle, sort of World War II-esque sort of weapon. It's nicely modeled, it's okay, but the main focus right now is its UVs. You can see in the UV editor that it is fully UV wrapped. Now, how do we go about taking these UVs and importing them into Photoshop? It's quite simple. What we need to do is we need to export this out as an image. We can do that by using the UV snapshot options, which can be found here. This camera icon here brings up our UV snapshot, which basically means we're taking an image of this particular part of the grid. I mean, you can change it to other parts of the grid, but it's better just leave it at default to 0 to 1. So we need to save this out to a specific location. So you want to press browse where it says file name and give your UVs a name. So for instance, I'm going to call it test. If I can spell it, that is. Now, at default, if you have a project file set up, the UVs always save out to the image folder, which is where this test PNG is going to go. If you don't have a Maya project set up, you may want to save this out to a location that's more suitable for you. So for instance, maybe a folder on your USB, somewhere within your OneDrive, for instance, just somewhere you know where you can find it easily. And what we want to do next is we want to set the X and Y size, which is basically the image size. Now, game engines work in the power of 2, which is 512 by 512, 1024 by 1024, 2048, 4096, and so on and so forth. Basically, Google the power of 2 just to get different numbers. But yeah, you want to make sure that you are in the power of 2 when exporting out your file sizes. Now, I would say it's better to go at a large file size and then reduce later on. So for instance, this gun, for instance, I might want to export out as like a 4K texture size, but the end result might just be, say, a basic HD file size, like say 1024. Because if you try to increase a file size from a small file to a larger file, so for instance, if I had a sub HD image and I tried to increase its size to say 4K, for instance, it will look very blurry and very pixelated because again I'm just blowing up an image that really isn't suitable for the larger file size. So it's always good to have a big file size and then reduce later. So for instance, I'm going to keep it at 1020 at a 2048 by 2048, and then the image format we want to have it as a PNG. Why? Because it has transparency. So when we export it out, it won't have any background, which will be quite useful later on in Photoshop, and you'll see why relatively soon. So then once we're happy with that, we press OK. And you'll see here that it will tell us that we have successfully saved our UV. Then we're going to Photoshop, press File, Open, and then for instance we'll go to our test one here. Okay, so right now it is quite hard to see. Basically what we've done here is we've exported out the lines essentially. So if I go back to Maya really quick right now, this is basically what we've exported out as a PNG, is these lines here. So it's quite hard to see at the moment, so what we need to do is we need to add a bit of background color to it. So over here is your layers options. You have different layers in which you can color in, import vector images, text images, etc. So what we want to do is we want to add a new layer, which can be found at the bottom here. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag this underneath. And if you double click where it says layer 1, you can change the name. So what I'm going to call this background. And then I'm going to go to the paint bucket. And I'm going to put away a color background. I always go for like a grey, for instance, but whatever works for you, you can choose. So I have like a bit of a darker grey here. And colour it in. So you can see now that we can kind of see our UV snapshot right now, but it is still a bit dark. So I want to go back to layer 1. And first things first, I'm going to rename this to UV. It's always a good idea to name your layer so you know what you're working with. Otherwise, you're going to have like layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It becomes very annoying very quick if you don't know what these layers are. Then here I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, brightness and contrast. This basically changes the tonal values of your image. So for instance, I'm going to increase the brightness and contrast. Just do it a couple more times. And you can see already that the UVs are really showing up now. And one last thing I could do is I can keep it like this if I wanted to, but I could also invert it as well, so I can have the lines black instead of white. Go to invert, and maybe just one last time, just make some adjustments to the contrast specifically. Yeah, happy with that. So now we have our UVs set up and ready to go in Photoshop. But one last thing I would suggest is to make sure to lock your layers. This basically stops us from moving it. So for instance, I cannot move this layer whatsoever because it's locked. You don't want to accidentally move your UVs because again, when we're texturing, we need to make sure that we are covering all of these lines up with a texture, like say a brick or wood, for instance, because when we export this back into Maya, these need to fit right on top of the original set of UVs. So in the next set of videos, I will be showcasing how to actually create your textures using text images and making some alterations here and there to make it really stand out and to make it unique for yourself.